During the time that the United States was fighting in World War II, the country was understandably committed to the defeat of the Axis powers. As a result, most American movies, books, and posters of this period depicted the U.S. Army as strong and honorable. Whether it was a matter of government propaganda or a product of their own free will, most Americans found themselves very patriotic and supportive of the military. For many Americans at this time, critique of that military was considered unwelcome. Those who criticized the U.S. Army were generally seen as disrespectful or un-American. Not everyone was afraid to speak out, though. This was especially true after the war. With that national urgency gone, some soldiers who had experienced being in the U.S. military firsthand actually wrote books inspired by their time in the service. Two of these writers, James Jones and William Gardner Smith, wrote novels after the war that chronicled all the injustices that they and their fellow men witnessed within the Army. Their books, From Here to Eternity and Last of the Conquerors, are stories of men who find Army life tedious, unfulfilling, or even traumatizing, not as a result of combat or actual warfare, but rather because of the meager living conditions and cruel, unchecked injustice inflicted by their superior officers. Escaping poverty, personal and career fulfillment, but not really. The protagonists in each of these books join the military looking for a better life. Robert Pruitt in From Here to Eternity comes from a long line of poor coal miners in an isolated southern town. Hayes Dawkins in Last of the Conquerors grows up as a poor black boy in Philadelphia, all too familiar with the city's filth, poverty, and racism. Both of these characters look to the Army as a way out of these circumstances. The military was marketed to these men as a place of opportunity. Pruitt even says that the pretty posters outside every post office in the nation advertised high pay, adventurous travel, the chance to be a leader, and lifelong skills as benefits of enlisting. In reality, he finds that as a soldier he often runs out of money at the end of each month, and without any warfare actually going on, a lot of his duty includes boring, menial, often pointless chores that provide no fulfillment or sense of purpose. They're often arbitrary cleaning tasks that lower ranks are ordered to do just for the sake of doing them. The military doesn't provide him with the financial opportunity that he hoped for at all. And on top of that, the job itself seems to depress him over time. When a sergeant comments to him that he has his whole life ahead of him, Pruitt just says, "But there's nothing in it to look forward to." Both the pro-military media and his uncle's fantastic Army stories excited and inspired Pruitt to enlist in the military as a lifelong, satisfying career. However, he finds that after actually serving, the satisfaction he hoped for never comes. Dawkins in Last of the Conquerors also joined the Army as a way out of his unsatisfactory life in Philadelphia. Dawkins himself says, "Quite a few of the men were in the Army to save money so that they could get married. Many were in the Army because they could find no suitable employment in civilian life. Some were trying to get away from a bad home environment, to see the world, to gain a new perspective. Some had family troubles." Dawkins tries to escape the poverty and racism of his own city, only to be severely disappointed. Traveling to Germany for his Army tour does give him some temporary happiness, as he gets to see a beautiful new country and befriend people who don't discriminate against him for being a black man. However, he finds that life within the Army base itself ranges from underwhelming to violently oppressive. The food is lackluster, the pipes freeze over, and the all-black battalion serve under degrading white officers. Additionally, as a black soldier in this time period, Dawkins would likely never have been granted a high-ranking leadership role. Really, his living conditions in the Army are no better than those at home. Abuse of power. While From Here to Eternity gives the perspective of a white protagonist and Last of the Conquerors a black one, both men are victims of cruel, unjust commanding officers. Pruitt's superiors insult and physically harm him all throughout the story. Pruitt is a fairly well-behaved soldier, and these injustices are typically unprovoked. Sergeant Warden calls him worthless and says that he's better off executed. Later, a military police officer shoots at Pruitt during a scuffle after a night out partying. At one point, a sergeant instigates a knife fight with him. Pruitt escapes the fight unharmed, but is sentenced to prison time, which exposes him to even more brutality. In the Army prison, he witnesses his fellow inmates being beaten, starved, and even killed. Even though his mother raised him not to hurt other people, this unjust military environment corners him in violating his deeply held principles. When he takes revenge on a prison guard who murdered one of his friends, we see that Pruitt has begun to participate in the violence he sees around him. Pruitt's story comes to an end when, after trying to enter the base without his ID card, he is killed by an Army base guard. All of these violent military officers go unpunished for their inhumane and illegal behavior. Pruitt's quality of life, and ultimately his life itself, is compromised at the mere whims of his higher-ups. In this novel, not even the protagonist himself is immune to the U.S. officer's deadly and often arbitrary cruelty. In Last of the Conquerors, Hayes Dawkins is a victim of officers who abuse their power as well. After the war, Dawkins is stationed in Germany to keep peace, only to find that a racist American power dynamic follows him there. Within the Army base, sergeants regularly insult Dawkins without provocation. A letter he was supposed to deliver gets thrown out right in front of him without even being read. One man in his company gets court-martialed just for tying his shoe while a superior was talking to him. Men who get venereal disease are punished by being restricted to camp for 30 days, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. This is both illegal and dehumanizing for the sick soldiers. This often pointless injustice is viewed as normal within the camp. Dawkins muses on the discontentment, thinking, everything had been normal in the company with the usual gripes about food and restriction, and the usual abundance of courts-martial. The sergeant continued to rush and shout and curse and nag. The captain gave a squeaky voice, often unreasonable orders. Accustomed to being mistreated, Dawkins thinks about all of this with a profound and defeated acceptance. It is also the norm for white American military police officers to beat up black soldiers for dating white women, which ends up happening to Dawkins himself. MPs take his girlfriend Ilsa from him, right off the street, and imprison her for 2 weeks. When Dawkins tries to help her, the MPs gang up on him and beat him. Towards the end of the story, Dawkins, a clerk, is forced to type out unjustified discharge letters for his fellow men. He is told to record that the men being discharged are lazy, badly behaved, or otherwise unfit to serve anymore, even though none of it is true. This plot point is based on the real mass discharges of black U.S. soldiers during the late 1940s. So many of these men were fired from a job that they expected to keep for their foreseeable futures, and they were wrongfully discharged without any rightful hearings. Dawkins says that the men who were discharged in this manner, something in the U.S. military known as a blue discharge, would forever be plastered with the stigma of undesirability and inefficiency. Soldiers who received the blue discharge would also never be permitted to serve in the military ever again, and would never receive military benefits in civilian life. White men get to worsen the quality of life for the black soldiers serving under them. They can insult, beat, wrongfully jail, and unjustly discharge the men, all with no consequences. The white officers can ruin the entire livelihoods and reputations of black soldiers, all at a whim. Dawkins' superior officers frequently and blatantly break the law. A corporal even tells him, "In this battalion, there ain't nothing illegal. They make their own laws around here." The Army culture that's portrayed in these novels includes the idea that violence is accepted and normalized. Both books showcase a lot of random, unchecked violence within the Army. This, along with boredom and no real oversight of officer behavior, allows for high-ranking men to dole out unprovoked brutality just for the sake of dominance. These authors really get the message across that in the Army of this period, truth and justice are often not upheld at all, and innocent people will be abused for no real reason. Conclusion. Both of these books give the distinct impression that life within the military is not nearly as gratifying as propaganda posters and films would lead one to believe. The media led both Pruitt and Dawkins to enter the Army optimistic about their futures. The Army's propaganda and strong reputation lured them into enlisting. While actually serving, meager living conditions and abusive officers lead them to question their superiors, their jobs, and their purposes in life. They do not find satisfaction in their lives as U.S. soldiers. The job is definitely not the escape from their life problems that they had hoped for. Both Pruitt's and Dawkins' stories take place during peacetime. From Here to Eternity mostly takes place before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Last of the Conquerors is set after World War II is already over. Neither of these characters are facing the hardships of battle, but they suffer under the U.S. military system itself. What happens to these characters shows the severe corruption and abuse possible within America's Army when you give some men unchecked power over others. The violent and negative atmosphere even corrupts the ordinary soldiers who entered the service with optimism. Being in the military chips away at their spirits and leaves them feeling hopeless and uninspired. The authors James Jones and William Gardner Smith both served in the Army during World War II themselves and wrote these novels quickly upon being discharged. One could speculate that the characters' pessimistic view of things reflects the author's own experiences. These authors may have seen these novels as their opportunity to communicate honestly about the disappointment they found in U.S. military life. Through their books, Jones and Smith criticize and abandon the idea of the romanticized soldier. Instead, they give a candid portrayal of the harsh struggles that soldiers endured within a corrupt military system.